It was in the winter of a year, which I shall not more precisely name, that there occurred one of the most singular and morally searching of those episodes which I have placed upon record concerning my friend Sherlock Holmes. The fog, which had lain over London since morning, had thickened towards evening into a yellowish pall that pressed against the window panes of our old rooms in Baker Street and muffled the ceaseless rumble of the great city to a distant murmur. Holmes sat in his accustomed armchair upon one side of the fire, his long figure coiled into an attitude of perfect repose, his thin hawk-like face lined in profile against the red glow, while his keen, grey eyes alone betrayed the ceaseless activity of the mind behind them. I had laid aside my medical journal, and was in the act of replenishing my pouch from the old tobacco jar when there came a sharp knock upon the street door, which resounded clearly up the stair.
"That will be for you, gentlemen, I make no doubt."
So cried Mrs. Hudson as her steps went briskly along the passage and up towards our landing. A moment later our landlady tapped and entered a card upon her tray, and a look of some curiosity upon her homely face.
"A gentleman to see you, sir, and he spoke your friend's name before I could announce it."
Holmes stretched out his long arm, took the card, and glanced at it with that swift hawk swoop of perception which I had so often admired.
Sir Watson here is an old acquaintance of ours who has come to us in a new capacity.
He flicked the pasteboard over to me with a smile in which there was both amusement and a certain grim expectancy. I read upon it the words Inspector Lestrade, Scotland Yard.
You see, gentlemen, I do not trouble you unless I must, but there are times when even a plain working man of the yard may be glad of a touch from the professor.
Thus he greeted us as he stepped briskly into the room, his spare figure and ferret features as keen and alert as ever, but with a little added gravity about the eyes, which bespoke some matter lying heavily upon his mind. Holmes waved him towards the empty chair upon the other side of the hearth.
You're always welcome in Baker Street, Lestrade, particularly when you come in that modest spirit of self-depreciation which so becomes you. Pray draw up to the fire, and let us hear what fresh tangle London has woven for our unravelling.
It is not London this time, Mr. Holmes, though London is ready enough to make mischief of it if I do not tread carefully. It is a matter of a missing young lady and a railway carriage, and there are newspapers already sniffing round it like terriers in a yard.
Holmes leaned forward in his chair, the languor falling from him as a cloak falls from the shoulders of a fencer who takes his guard.
A missing young lady in a railway carriage, you say? You interest me very deeply, Lestrade. Give us the facts as you know them, with nothing coloured either by the company point of view or by that of the relatives.
You shall have them as straight as I can give you, Mr. Holmes, though there are one or two points that I do not pretend to fathom as yet. 3 nights ago a young lady named Clara Hastings disappeared on the evening train from Victoria to Wessex, and from that hour to this not a trace of her has been seen by anyone whom we can lay our hands upon.
The name seemed to awake some recollection in my own mind, for I started slightly in my chair. Seeing this movement, Holmes glanced swiftly at me.
You appear struck, Watson.
The name is not unknown to me, Holmes, though I cannot at once place it. I seem to remember some mention of a Clara Hastings in connection with the ladies' school in Surrey.
You are right there, Doctor, for she is ward and niece to Dr. Arthur Pembroke, who is head of St. Anne Ladies' College near Woking. You may have seen the name to a subscription or a letter on educational matters, for he is a very high figure in that line and a great talker about morals and such like.
Pray proceed, Lestrade.
The girl had been in London for several days, staying with a respectable widow in Bayswater while she sat for certain examinations for a teaching certificate. On the evening in question she took her seat in a compartment reserved for ladies only on the 6:20 train from Victoria, booked right through to the little station which serves St. Anne. A porter saw her enter, the guard swears to having seen her later sitting by the window with a book in her hand, and 2 male passengers in contiguous compartments bear out the same. Yet when the train reached its destination the door of the compartment had to be forced and the young lady was gone, leaving no more trace than if she had melted into the fog.
Holmes clasped his long fingers and rested his chin upon them, his eyes half closed while his eager mind drank in each detail.
You say the door was forced. Was it locked?
Fast locked, and the key upon the inside, so the guard says. The window was closed, though not bolted, and there was nothing whatever to show how a lady could have left the carriage between Victoria and St. Anne, nor any sign that she had done so.
Describe the line for me, if you please.
It is a well-used route, double-tracked all way, with no tunnels and no viaducts of any height. There are stations at fair intervals, but the only point where the train stands for more than a moment is at a little place called Merton Holt, where she waits about a minute for a main line express to go by.
No bridge, no cutting, and no lonely embankment.
Nothing that could give cover to any mischief more serious than a boy throwing stones.
And what are the other passengers in the compartment? Was she alone?
She was alone when she started, and she should have been alone throughout, for the company is particular about the ladies' coach, but there is a suggestion that someone may have looked in or spoken with her at one of the intermediate stops.
A mere suggestion is meat and drink to us in Baker Street. We shall return to that, no doubt. You mentioned a respectable widow with whom the young lady lodged. What more do you know of the domestic background?
The widow, a Mrs. Vale, states that the girl was much disturbed in mind on the morning of her departure, and that she spent a long time writing and rewriting a letter which she finally enclosed with what looked like a photograph in a thick envelope addressed to a clergyman in the East End known for his views on certain abuses abroad. Before leaving the house, Miss Hastings begged that if anything befell her the landlady would post that envelope, which Mrs. Vale promised to do. But she never had the chance, for the envelope was taken from the mantel by the young lady herself as she left, and we have not seen it since.
We have then a young lady who fears that something may befall her, who's troubled by a photograph and a letter, and it disappears from a locked railway compartment between two stations. You will admit, Watson, that we have here the very elements of a drama.
It is indeed most singular. What say the relatives to all this, Lestrade?
The only near relative is Dr. Pembroke, the headmaster uncle I spoke of. He is loud in lamenting the girl, and louder still in deploring what he calls the taste of the press for scandal. At the same time he is over free, to my thinking, in hinting that she was a bit flighty and may have run off with some fellow whom we have not yet traced.
You do not yourself incline to that view?
I do not, Mr. Holmes. I have talked with the landlady and with one of the teachers from St. Anne who had a great kindness for the girl, and between them they give me a very different notion. They speak of her as grave, thoughtful, and with a conscience even over-scrupulous. Mrs. Vale goes so far as to say that the girl told her she had discovered something which would utterly ruin her uncle if it were known, and that she must take counsel upon it.
So, now, Watson, we begin to see why a clergyman with a reputation for plain speaking on imperial questions should have been chosen as her confidant rather than some fashionable London man of law.
Holmes had straightened himself in his chair, and the light of intellectual battle had leapt into his eyes.
You have done exceedingly well to bring this to us, Lestrade. It is not only a question of a missing young lady, but there is a grim shadow cast from overseas across our quiet English platform.
Then you will take it up, Mr. Holmes. I would not have troubled you if it were a simple runaway, but there is a twist to it that goes beyond my powers.
I shall take it up with all the more zest because you confess a difficulty. We shall first, I think, pay our respects to Dr. Pembroke and view for ourselves the atmosphere of this St. Anne Ladies' College.
And the landlady, Holmes. Would it not be well that we should hear her story with our own ears?
Admirably suggested, Watson. We will divide the matter into its natural stages, beginning with the domestic and ending with the railway. If you will oblige me with train times to Surrey, Lestrade, we may yet forestall some of those terriers of the press of whom you complain.
Lestrade produced a greasy little book from his pocket and ran a practised finger down its columns, while Holmes rose to his feet with the quick decision which always heralded action.
If you take the 10:35, you will be at the college by noon, and I can meet you there later in the afternoon after I have done a little work among the railway folk.
Excellent. Watson, you will oblige me by putting your revolver where you can reach it for cases which begin in fog off and end in darker weather.
20 minutes later, we were rattling in a cab through the murky streets towards the great station, and the last I saw of Lestrade was his thin figure standing under our lamp, head bent over his notebook as the fog closed round him. Our journey to the Surrey border was made for the most part in silence, for my companion lay back with closed eyes and that singular air of abstraction, which I had learned to recognize as the outward sign of his fiercest mental concentration. It was not until the ugly suburbs with their rows of monotonous villas had given place to bare hedgerows and flat winter fields that he opened his eyes and drew from his pocket the card which Lestrade had left with us bearing the name of Dr. Arthur Pembroke.
You remember such a person, Watson?
The name is familiar to me in connection with certain letters in the medical press upon the training of girls. He is much given to insisting upon discipline and moral safeguards.
A moralist is an interesting creature to study, particularly when Providence has placed some compromising document in the hands of an impressionable young relative. I fancy we shall find in Dr. Pembroke a mind which has long been exercised in keeping the young from harm, and which may have been driven in the end to do a very harmful thing in order to preserve its own comfort.
The train drew up at a little country station fringed with bare poplars and flanked by a goods yard and a water tower, and there upon the platform we saw a tall spare man in a frock coat and silk hat who stepped forward with a certain measured eagerness as we alighted.
Gentlemen, I take it that I have the honour of addressing Mr. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson.
His voice was precise and slightly nasal, his clean-shaven face keen and ascetic, with deep lines about the mouth and a pair of cold blue eyes, which yet could melt quickly into an expression of professional benevolence.
We are at your service, Dr. Pembroke. Inspector Lestrade has spoken to us of your distressing family misfortune and has asked that we lend what aid we can.
It is kind, very kind, that you should trouble yourselves, though I trust you will find that we have not been remiss in dealing with the matter ourselves. My sole desire is that no unseemly publicity should attach either to my ward or to the institution which it has been my lifelong labour to establish.
As we walked from the station towards the school buildings, which rose square and severe, beyond a belt of leafless shrubs, I had opportunity to observe our host more narrowly. He spoke readily and with an air of authority upon all matters connected with the training of girls, but when he mentioned Clara Hastings there came into his tone a curious mixture of real sorrow and something which I could not at once define, but which struck me as akin to fear.
She was a good girl in the main, gentlemen, though of late I had observed in her a tendency to morbid introspection and a receptivity towards dangerous modern ideas. I would not have you suppose that I am blind to her virtues, yet I cannot but ascribe her disappearance to some hysterical impulse rather than to the intervention of external violence.
You're of opinion, then, that she may have fled of her own free will?
It is a painful thought to entertain, but when one has seen the mischief wrought by irresponsible literature and the example of a corrupt metropolis, one is prepared for any aberration.
You had no reason to suspect a special object for such a flight?
None that I can admit, though I have feared that her imagination may have been seized by some rhetoric upon alleged abuses in remote stations of the empire. It is the misfortune of the age that those who have borne its burdens are arraigned by young persons who know nothing of the necessities of administration.
Holmes cast one swift sidelong glance at me, and I saw the corner of his lip twitch under the thin dark line of his moustache. We had reached the high brick wall and the iron gate of the college, through which we passed into a quadrangle surrounded by plain red buildings whose every line spoke of order, economy, and the repression of all that was individual or picturesque. Dr. Pembroke conducted us to his study, a large room lined with bookcases and adorned with maps, with a massive writing table in the centre on which were neatly arranged piles of papers, a large inkstand, and a small dispatch box of dark leather.
Here, gentlemen, is the room in which I spend the greater part of my life, labouring for the formation of character in the young. Pray be seated while I place before you my own knowledge of this unhappy affair.
We took the chairs he indicated, while he stood by the hearth, his long hands clasped behind his back, his head somewhat bent as if in habitual meditation.
My niece, Clara, is an orphan who has been under my care since her 10th year and who has received here such education as I can bestow. She is of a sensitive and high-minded disposition, yet latterly I have observed in her a certain restless questioning which I have striven, though perhaps with insufficient firmness, to direct into safer channels. When it became necessary for her to sit certain examinations in London, I placed her with a widow of unimpeachable respectability, and I warned her constantly against the perils of the town. You can imagine then what a blow it was when I received from the station master a message that she had not descended from the train which should have brought her home.
What did you do upon receipt of that message?
I hastened at once to the station, arranged for a search of the line and of the train, and did what I could to compose the minds of those who had been fellow travellers. It was imperative that no foolish rumours should arise which might injure the reputation of the college or of my niece herself.
Holmes had risen and was sauntering slowly round the room with the appearance of aimless curiosity which covered his most careful observation. His long white fingers touched a book here, a curtain cord there, or traced the outline of a picture frame, while his keen eyes darted swift glances at the heavy desk with its locked drawers and the little dark dispatch box upon it.
You have had no communication from Miss Hastings since that time?
None whatever. I cling to the hope that she may yet write to me from some foolish refuge which she has chosen, but each day that passes makes that hope more shadowy.
And yet you appear almost more anxious regarding public comment than regarding her safety.
Sir, the two things are inseparable in such a position as mine. A rumour of scandal, however baseless, might wreck the work of 20 years and destroy the faith of parents in the security of this institution.
At the instant there came a timid tap at the door, and a small, slight lady with anxious eyes and greying hair stood upon the threshold.
I beg your pardon, Dr. Pembroke, but Miss Vale from London is in the outer room, and as you are engaged, I thought perhaps she might speak first with these gentlemen.
Very well, Miss Grey, you did perfectly right. Gentlemen, this is Miss Lydia Grey, who has been one of our senior teachers for many years. She knew my niece well and has been deeply affected by her absence.
We shall hope to profit by her knowledge.
Miss Grey retired, and a moment later there entered a stout, good-natured woman in provincial black, whose face, though flushed by travel and emotion, bore the unmistakable stamp of honesty.
I take it that you are the gentleman Mr. Lestrade spoke of, sir.
She curtsied awkwardly in our direction as she spoke.
I'm the landlady with whom the young lady lodged in London, and I thought it my duty to tell in my own words what she said to me before she left.
Pray be seated, Mrs. Vale, and be so good as to give us every word you can recall.
Well then, sir, the poor young lady was that troubled all the morning that I could see she had some weight on her mind. She sat in my parlour with a photograph in her hand, and every now and again she would look at it and then cover her face as if she could not bear the sight. At last she wrote a letter and enclosed the photograph in it and sealed it very carefully, and she asked me straight out if I would post it with my own hand if anything happened to her on the way home.
Did she say what she feared might happen?
She said that she had learned something about one who was very near to her which would ruin him utterly if it were known, and that certain gentlemen would move heaven and earth to keep it secret. I asked if she meant to do him an injury, and she said that she desired only that he should tell the truth for once before God. Then she cried a little and asked my pardon for troubling me, and went away in the cab to the station with a letter in her own hand.
And that letter has never since been heard of so far as we know.
No, sir, though I have prayed that it might come safe into some honest hands if mine could not carry it.
Holmes thanked the good woman and dismissed her with a few words which brought tears to her eyes, for there was a gentleness in my friend when dealing with honest sorrow that sat strangely upon his incisive features. When she had gone, he turned once more to Dr. Pembroke, who had listened with a face of rigid propriety, though his long fingers still writhed together behind his back.
We shall now, with your permission, examine the room which Miss Hastings occupied in this house.
Assuredly, though you will find nothing there beyond the ordinary possessions of a girl of her class.
We followed him along a bare corridor and up a short flight of stairs to a small chamber looking out upon the leafless shrubs of the garden. It was scrupulously neat, with a narrow bed, a simple chest of drawers, a small table, and upon the wall 1 or 2 cheap prints representing scriptural scenes and views of foreign missions. Holmes moved slowly about the room, taking in every detail with a glancing comprehensive eye. He opened a drawer here, lifted the lid of a workbox there, examined the labels of a few books and the initials upon a linen collar. At last his attention fastened upon a coloured print of a mission station by a river, the frame of which seemed to have been hastily shifted, for there was a clean mark upon the wallpaper around it. With a sudden movement he took it down, ran his hand behind the flimsy backing, and drew forth a stiff square of card which had been concealed there. He held it to the light, and I saw that it was a photograph somewhat faded at the edges, but still clear in the centre. It represented a group of 4 young officers standing in the sun-baked yard of some rough stockaded station, with a line of native huts and a distant belt of trees behind them. One of the 4 I recognised at once in spite of the younger and fuller face as our host, Dr. Pembroke. Near the edge of the picture, half cut off by the careless focusing of the camera, there was visible part of a wooden frame and some indistinct human figures bound to it. Across one corner of the card some hand, surely of a feminine one from the delicacy of the stroke, had written in ink the words Karenga withheld in 1879, what he never confessed. Along the right-hand side another face had been so violently scratched out with a pin or other sharp point that the surface of the photograph was deeply scored.
This is a very interesting little document, Watson. It would seem that our young friend had already been engaged upon a private investigation of her own.
Pembroke had grown very pale, and his lips moved before any sound came from them.
That photograph is my property and was placed here only temporarily. I must ask you to restore it to me at once.
Nay, Doctor, I fear that for the present it must remain in my hands. You are aware that the law takes, unfortunately, little interest in the property of private gentlemen, where the liberty or life of a subject is concerned.
You presume too far, sir. A youthful mind may see guilt where there is but the hard necessity of command, and it may scribble foolish accusations upon a card without any knowledge of the facts.
That may very well be so. It will be our business to learn whether it is so or not.
As he spoke, he slipped the photograph into his pocketbook with an air of finality which admitted of no protest. A few minutes later we had taken our leave of Dr. Pembroke and were walking back towards the station under the grey sky, while the wind drove dead leaves before us along the road.
Holmes strode at my side with his head bent and his hands thrust deep into the pockets of his overcoat, and I knew well from the set of his jaw that his mind was moving swiftly from point to point of the problem.
It was not until the train had borne us once more towards London that he spoke at any length.
We have now, Watson, 3 senses of interest in this affair. There is the railway carriage from which a young lady vanishes, there is the photograph which records some ugly scene at a place called Karenga, and there is the personality of Dr. Pembroke, who desires, above all things, that nothing which connects those 2 facts shall come to the ears of the world.
You think then that the colonial incident and the disappearance are directly linked?
My dear fellow, why else should a girl of a reproachable character be in such anguish over a photograph and a letter that she goes in fear of what may befall her on a journey? She had stumbled upon her guardian's secret, had confronted him, had refused to be satisfied with his excuses, and had determined to seek counsel outside. He's seeing ruin staring him in the face take steps which he afterwards persuades himself are taken in the interest of his school and his mission and not of his own comfort.
You speak as if you already saw the whole course of events.
I see it as one sees through a mist when some shapes are distinct and others still vague. There remains for us the railway element and the evidence of those who were upon the platform when the empty carriage came in.
You propose to see them?
Assuredly, and more than that, I propose to be myself a passenger upon the same train and in the same compartment.
That evening found us once more at Victoria, taking our tickets for the Little Surrey station and seeing our small bags labelled for convenience, though there was little enough in them. At the stroke of 6:20, the train drew out with that ponderous movement which so soon becomes a flying rush, and Holmes and I sat side by side in the compartment reserved for ladies, which we had secured by the simple expedient of entering it before anyone else could claim it.
Holmes had his watch upon his knee and a small railway map upon his lap, and I saw him note each signal and mark each slackening of speed as we went.
Presently we drew up at a little wayside station, where a porter bustled along the platform. A few country folk entered other carriages, and a stout commercial traveller with a red necktie took his place in the corridor just outside our compartment to smoke his cigar. At each halt Holmes glanced swiftly out and then back to his map. After some 30 minutes of running, the train slackened again and came to a stand before a tiny platform upon which a single oil lamp burned feebly against the darkness. Beyond I could just discern the black outline of hedges and a faint gleam of what might be water.
This, if I mistake not, is Merton Holt. Observe that we are here for rather more than a mere stop, and that there is a footpath leading from the far end of the platform into the darkness.
I leaned out as he did, and saw that at the extremity of the little station there was indeed a wicket gate, and beyond it a narrow path that seemed to make for a cluster of faint lights, which suggested an inn or a group of cottages. Down the line, a powerful headlight showed that some great mainline engine was roaring towards us, and in a moment it thundered past and was gone. Then a whistle blew, the guard waved his lamp, and we were once more in motion.
You perceive how admirable an opportunity is here presented to anyone who desires to remove a passenger unseen. A confederate upon the platform with a key to the compartment at a moment of darkness while the express passes, a dazed or half-drugged victim hurried along that path, and the thing is done.
But the witnesses who declare that they saw Miss Hastings after this halt.
Precisely, those witnesses are our next object to study.
On our arrival at the little station, we found Lestrade awaiting us with a bundle of notes in his hand and a rather rueful expression upon his shrewd face.
I have seen the guard and the porter and one of the passengers, Mr. Holmes, and I own that I do not understand them. Each is positive that he saw the young lady in her place after Merton Holt, and each uses, without collusion as far as I can see, the same words about her being a pale young lady with a book in her hand.
The very unanimity is what condemns their testimony. Honest recollections differ in their phrases as honest faces differ in their lines, but rehearsed tales have a family likeness.
Do you mean that there has been foul play with the evidence as well as with the girl?
I mean that Dr. Pembroke has not confined his activities to the management of a school. He has ventured to give lessons in memory to grown men who would have done better to trust their own.
One by one, under Holmes' patient but probing questions, the witnesses were brought into the dingy little waiting room and made to repeat their stories in his presence.
The guard, a simple fellow with honest eyes and a somewhat slow brain, was the first to falter. He admitted that he had been much flurried by the discovery of the empty carriage, and that Dr. Pembroke had taken him aside and talked to him long and gravely of the danger of idle gossip. It had been the headmaster who first suggested that he must have seen the lady at the last intermediate station, and he had repeated again and again the phrase which he now used as if it were his own. The stout commercial traveller confessed that he had been given a nip from the doctor flask for his nerves, and that his recollection of the exact stages of the journey was anything but clear. Yet even he repeated, as if it was something learned, that he had seen the pale young lady with a book when the train moved out after the halt. A young sergeant of infantry, who had been in a smoking compartment nearby, was equally confident until Holmes gently led him back over the ground step by step. Under that guidance it appeared that he had in fact seen a figure in a cloak and hat lean forward at the window of the ladies' compartment, but he could not swear that it was the same young lady whom he had observed at Victoria.
You see, Lestrade, that expectation and suggestion have done their work. Each of these honest fellows saw something at Merton Holt, but what they saw has been coloured and moulded by the account furnished them by a gentleman whom they regarded as a superior authority.
You make it sound, Mr. Holmes, as if the whole platform had been under a sort of spell.
Exactly so. There remains but one person whom we have not yet heard, and who may unconsciously hold the key to the visual part of the trick.
You mean the teacher from the school? She's here in the village, staying with an old aunt, and is ready to come if required.
By all means, let us hear Miss Lydia Gray.
She came soon after, the same slight, anxious figure whom we had seen outside Dr. Pembroke's study, and she sat twisting her worn gloves between nervous fingers, while Holmes regarded her with his most reassuring expression.
Pray do not be distressed, Miss Gray. We desire only that you tell us exactly what share you had in the journey of your pupil.
I had no share, sir, or so I told myself, though I see now that I was weak and foolish.
Dr. Pembroke asked me, as a favour to him, to travel down by the same train and to take a place in the compartment next to that reserved for ladies, so that I might be at hand should Miss Hastings feel faint or overwrought.
Did you at any time enter the compartment of Miss Hastings?
Not while she was there, sir, but at Merton Holt the doctor came along the corridor and opened my door and begged me, for the sake of the school, to do a very strange thing.
What was that thing, Miss Gray?
He took from his arm a cloak and hat, which I knew for those of Miss Hastings, and he implored me just to throw them on and to lean forward at the window for a moment while the guard went by.
He said that the girl had been suffering from nervous fancies and had begged him to shield her from observation, and that it would quiet minds and prevent talk if it were thought she was still seated calmly in her place. I was frightened, and I did not understand, yet I have always been one who obeyed authority, and so, against my better sense, I did as he asked.
I put on the cloak and hat and leaned forward at the window while the guard passed, and then I drew back and he took them from me again.
Did you see Miss Hastings at that time?
No, sir, for the doctor kept between me and the other compartment, and he told me afterwards that she had passed along the train to speak with him.
And afterwards?
Afterwards there was confusion and cries at the last station, and we heard that she was gone, and the doctor charged me most strictly never to mention that I had worn her things, as it would only cause useless talk.
The poor lady broke into tears at this point, and we could obtain little more from her save renewed protestations of remorse for her weakness. Holmes soothed her with a few grave words, and when she had withdrawn he turned to us with that quiet air of satisfaction, which I knew for the sign that his theory had received support.
You perceive, gentlemen, that the visual illusion is now wholly explained. The men upon the platform did indeed see a pale young lady with a book, or what they took for such, but she was no more Clara Hastings than I am. Dr. Pembroke had provided himself with a lay figure to occupy the stage, while the real actor was being removed behind the scenes.
But removed where and how?
We returned then to Merton Holt on that obliging footpath. It is clear to me that Miss Hastings was taken from the train at that point in a condition which rendered her incapable of making an outcry such as would have drawn attention. There is talk of nervous fancies and a restorative draught, and I fancy that the resources of Dr. Pembroke's medical knowledge have been turned to a darker use than any he employs at his school.
You think then that she was drugged?
Sufficiently to dull her senses and to leave her blind under the hands of those who removed her. From Merton Holt there are several possible routes, but I have already a conjecture as to which was chosen.
And where does it lead, Mr. Holmes?
To the sea, Lestrade, and to a certain solitary cottage on the Devon coast.
I stared at my companion in astonishment, while the inspector opened his notebook with an air of resignation as one who prepares to follow a reasoning beyond his own.
I have taken the trouble to glance over Dr. Pembroke's movements during the last few months. He has paid repeated visits to a little fishing village named Brackenmouth upon the Devon coast under the pretext of recruiting his health. Near that village, upon a lonely headland, stands a disused Coast Guard cottage which belongs to the government and is seldom visited. From Merton Holt by a change at 2 junctions one can reach the small station which serves Brackenmouth in a few hours. I think it highly probable that our missing lady is at this moment a prisoner in that cottage, awaiting transportation, perhaps to some colonial mission station, perhaps to an institution, where her testimony will be discredited as the ravings of a disordered mind.
It is a long shot, Mr. Holmes.
I grant you that it is a shot, but it is not so long as it appears. We have a man who fears exposure of a colonial episode, who is an accomplice adept with a cure at Merton Holt. There is rehearsed witnesses to swear that the girl was not removed there, and has been making familiar the path to a remote seaside cottage. Unless you can suggest some other object for these combined activities, I shall hold to my hypothesis.
I have learnt from experience that when you speak in that tone it is well to buy a ticket. What do you advise?
I advise that we take the first train westward to Brackenmouth, and that we approach the cottage by night and from the landward side. If I err, the loss will be some hours of your time, and a little fatigue, but if I am right we shall restore a girl to liberty, and place a very respectable gentleman in a very awkward position.
So it came about that late that same night we found ourselves upon a small bleak platform on the edge of the Atlantic, with the salt wind cutting through our greatcoats, and the distant boom of the surf sounding like cannon shots in the darkness. A solitary porter directed us to an inn, where we could obtain such rough lodging as the place afforded, and there we remained until near midnight, when Holmes judged that the fishermen would be long abed and the cliff path deserted. Then, with our collars up and our caps pulled down, we struck out by a narrow lane that climbed steadily between stone walls tufted with coarse grass and gorse until we came out upon the bare upland. The moon rode high between torn clouds, and her cold light showed us the dark line of the cliff edge upon our left and the shadowy bulk of a little house set back from it upon our right. A faint glimmer in one of its windows betrayed that it was not wholly untenanted.
That, if I am not greatly mistaken, is our Coast Guard cottage. If you will kindly keep to the shadow of the wall, gentlemen, we may yet learn something of what passes within before we show ourselves.
We crept along the low wall which divided a rough strip of garden from the open moor, and presently, by crouching low, we were able to peer into the front room of the cottage through a broken pane. A A smoky lamp upon a wooden table cast a circle of yellow light within, which sat a burly man in seaman clothes with a clay pipe between his teeth and a pewter pot at his elbow. Upon the table near his hand lay a folded paper and what looked like a small leather case.
She will fret herself to death if she goes on this way, and no mistake.
So he muttered to himself, for his voice carried clearly through the broken glass.
But it is no concern of mine, so long as I get my money and keep my mouth shut.
At the instant there came from within the house a faint sound as of a chair pushed back and a step crossing the floor, and then a woman voice, weak but resolute, spoke from an inner doorway.
I beg you, will you let me see what is written there?
You had best get back to your room, miss, or you will have the doctor upon me for not keeping you quiet.
I have been quiet because I was told that it was for the good of those I care for, but I will not be quiet if my silence is to be used to wrong them. I demand to know whether he still means to send me away where no one will ever hear my side.
You will know what you are meant to know when the proper time comes, and not before. Get you back, now, for he may be here any hour.
At these words Holmes laid his hand lightly upon my arm, and his eyes shone in the moonlight.
You hear, Watson. The bird is indeed in the cage, and the fowler is expected. We must act before he comes, lest he take alarm and shift his plans.
Together we moved round to the cottage door, and Holmes tried the latch with as much concern as if he had been entering our own rooms in Baker Street. It yielded to his touch, and in an instant we were in the little passage, where our sudden appearance held the burly man in the front room as if some spell had fallen upon him.
Who are you, or what do you want here at this hour?
You will find the answer to that question at the end of my warrant if you give me cause to show it.
Lestrade had stepped briskly past us, for he loved nothing so much as the sound of his official voice, even in a lonely cottage.
I am Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard, and I arrest you on a charge of unlawfully detaining a young lady against her will.
I have done nothing but what I was paid for, and I never laid a hand on her rougher than I would on my own daughter.
You may reserve your explanations for another occasion. Watson, be so good as to attend to the young lady, while Lestrade secures our friend and sees whether any weapon is handy.
Guided by the memory of the voice I had heard, I made my way to the inner door and tapped gently upon it before entering. The room within was small and bare, with a truckle bed, a chair, and a narrow window through which the moonlight streamed. Upon the bed there sat a girl in a plain dark dress, her face pale and thin, but lit by large eyes which shone with an eagerness that was almost fierce as she looked towards me.
You are not with him. I can see that in your face.
You are quite right, Miss Hastings. We are here at the instance of the law and of a friend who believes that a great wrong has been done you.
Then it is true that he meant to send me away where no one would hear me.
He will not send you anywhere safe, to some safe shelter of your own choosing, for his power over you is at an end.
You speak very confidently for one who has yet to learn the influence which my guardian can exert upon those above him.
His influence is not so great as that of a clear fact placed before an English jury and an English public. Believe me, he has overplayed his hand.
I would gladly pay for justice with my own comfort, but I could not bear that his sin should be hidden by my silence.
You shall have every opportunity of speaking, but I must beg you now to husband your strength. We have a long journey before us and many questions to answer. She rose with some difficulty, for there was a languor in her movements which confirmed Holmes' suspicion that drugs had been employed. With such rough assistance as I could give, I wrapped her in a cloak which hung upon a peg and led her into the outer room, where Lestrade had already secured the man with the aid of a length of rope and a pair of handcuffs which he produced with evident satisfaction.
This fellow is named Bill Craddock, a discharged porter from the very station we know of, and I fancy that he will have a tale to tell before we have done with him.
We shall hear it at our leisure. For the present it is enough that we have recovered Miss Hastings, and that our thread connects Merton Holt with Brackenrath, as I had supposed.
Within an hour we had roused the sleepy porter at the station and engaged a special train to take us to the nearest junction, where we might join the up mail, for Lestrade was anxious to place his prisoner in secure hands without delay. It was grey morning when at last we drew into Waterloo and took a cab thence to Baker Street, When Mrs. Hudson bustled out, her expression a curious mixture of pleasure at seeing us and concern at the sight of our pale and weary companion.
Bless my soul, gentlemen, you look as if you had been to the end of the world and back.
We have been far enough, Mrs. Hudson, and we bring back one who has travelled further in mind than in miles.
The poor young lady shall have my best room and a warm drink, and you shall see if Mrs. Hudson cannot put some life into her again.
Under the kindly ministrations of our landlady and such small skill as I possess, Clara Hastings soon recovered sufficient strength to tell her story connectedly in the presence of Holmes and Lestrade, who listened with a gravity befitting the revelation.
I found the photograph by chance in a locked drawer of my guardian desk, together with a letter from one who would be his comrade in Africa, and who accused him of having signed a false report after a man had been flogged to death. At first I could not believe it, but the words were so precise, and the picture so dreadful that at last I ventured to ask him what it meant. He was terribly moved, more than I had ever seen him, and he confessed that there had been harsh measures at that station, but he said that without severity the empire would fall into ruin. He knelt to me and implored me to keep his secret, saying that if it were known not only he but the school, and all the good it did would be destroyed. I was torn in my mind, for I loved him as the only father I had known, yet I could not bear that such a thing should be hidden. In the end I resolved to seek counsel from one who would not be afraid to speak of these matters, and so I wrote to a clergyman whose sermons I had read, and I enclosed the photograph. My guardian was going to London at the same time for business, and he insisted upon arranging all that concerned my journey and my lodging. He was very tender with me, more tender than ever before, and spoke often of rest and of the need to calm my overstrained nerves. On the day of my return he came to the widow's house and brought with him a small bottle of medicine, which he said would brace me for the journey, and he begged me to take a dose before I started, and another in the train if I felt faint. I obeyed him because I had always obeyed him, though I had some misgiving, and from that moment my head grew heavy and my thoughts confused. I remember entering the carriage at Victoria and seeing him upon the platform and thinking that his face looked strange in the smoke, and I remember the train starting. After that there are only broken pictures in my mind, as of a little station, a dark figure bending over me, cold air upon my face, and the smell of the sea. When I awoke to any clearness I was already in that cottage, and my guardian was standing beside the bed with Bill Craddock behind him. He told me that I had been very ill, and that it was necessary to keep me absolutely quiet until my mind should be restored, and he said that if I did not submit I should be sent where I would be treated as a dangerous lunatic. He implored me again to spare him and the school, and he said that those who were trying to drag old stories into the light were enemies of our country and of religion. I answered that I could not consent to a lie even to save him, and from that time he grew colder and said that he must act for the greater good though my feelings were hurt. I lived in fear, not for myself, but lest I should be removed to some place from which no word of the truth could escape.
Her voice faltered and she looked appealingly towards Holmes. I could see that the memory of her struggle between affection and conscience weighed upon her more heavily than the physical hardships of her captivity.
You have shown great courage, Miss Hastings, both in resisting unlawful pressure and in enduring the consequences. I think you may trust that the truth which you have resolved to tell will not now be again buried in any official filing drawer.
You may rest assured, miss, that the law will take a very stern view of what has been done under colour of your guardian authority. This is no case of a girl being carried off by ruffians of the street, but of a respectable gentleman using his position and knowledge to deprive you of your liberty.
When she had withdrawn to her room, Lestrade turned to us with a hard look upon his angular face.
There are more guilty tongues than one in this affair, gentlemen. We have the man who held her in that cottage, and we have the man who drugged her and set that man on, and we have perhaps some others who lent a hand at Merton Holt. I shall go at once to secure Dr. Pembroke before any rumour reaches him that his little scheme has miscarried.
I would advise speed, for he is not one who will sit waiting to be arrested if he can help it.
As events proved, Lestrade was in good time, for he found the headmaster at his desk in the study at St. Anne Pell, but outwardly composed, and with the travelling bag half packed upon a chair beside him. The inspector had the grim satisfaction of snapping the handcuffs upon those long nervous wrists, while he recited the list of charges in a dry official voice.
The subsequent proceedings I do not propose to detail, for it is my custom to dwell rather upon the steps by which Holmes reaches his conclusions, than upon those more public stages which bring a case to its legal end.
It is sufficient to say that Bill Craddock, faced with the evidence of our visit to the cottage, and with the prospect of a long term, made a clean breast of his share in the business. He confessed that he had been persuaded by Pembroke to take a post as porter at the little station, and to perfect himself in the use of the compartment keys, and that he had received orders and money to be upon the platform at Merton Halt upon the night in question.
He told how he had opened the carriage while the express roared by, how he and the doctor had lifted out the half-conscious girl, and how he had hurried her along the path to the lane, while his employer busied himself with the other passengers and the guard.
He declared that he had been assured she was mad, and that it was for her own good that she should be kept from roaming at large with dangerous stories. This story, supported by the testimony of Miss Gray and the witnesses from the platform, was rectified under Holmes' cross-examination, left little doubt in the minds of judge and jury.
Dr. Pembroke defended himself with a cold and subtle eloquence, representing his acts as those of a man who sacrifices his own peace to the good of others, and who takes upon himself the odium of harsh measures in order to prevent what he called a national mischief.
But the shadow of Karanga hung heavy over him, and though the colonial authorities were slow and unwilling to reopen old sores, public opinion was less ready to follow their example.
It was known that some man had died under the lash at that remote station, and that the medical officer had signed a report which did not tally with certain private letters and recollections. A photograph and the anonymous accuser letter, combined with his own agitation and the desperate nature of his attempts to suppress inquiry, weighed heavily against him.
In the end, he was convicted upon the English charges of kidnapping, unlawful confinement, and conspiracy to obstruct justice, and he was sentenced to a term of penal servitude, which put an end to his scholastic and moral labours. Clara Hastings, freed from his control, was received for a time into the home of the London clergyman whose counsel she had sought, and later, as I have reason to note, she married a quiet scholar whose views upon certain colonial questions were not unlike her own. It was some days after the trial that I sat once more with Holmes in our familiar room, while the spring sunlight, weak but kindly, lay upon the littered table, and the smoke of his pipe curled slowly upwards into the air. The newspaper, which lay open upon my knee, contained a brief paragraph recording that Dr. Pembroke had been struck from the roll of the educational society to which he had belonged, and that certain patrons of St. Anne Ladies' College had expressed their profound regret at being deceived by one whom they had trusted. I could not but reflect that such paragraphs, cold and formal, are the final public record of tragedies which tear hearts and change destinies. Holmes lay back with his eyes half closed, his long legs stretched before him, and his fingertips pressed together.
I knew from his expression that his thoughts were moving upon those deeper channels which at rare times revealed themselves beneath his icy intellectual surface. At last he removed the pipe from his lips and spoke.
There is more moral significance in this little case, Watson, than in many of those which furnish a more stirring entertainment to the public.
You mean in the matter of colonial responsibility?
Partly that, though I have no ambition to rival the platform orator. What strikes me is the extraordinary readiness of society to forget that memory is not a record but an instrument, and that those who have authority over others are often its most skillful players. You saw how a few earnest phrases from a respected headmaster turned the recollections of guard and porter into a chorus of agreement with his own version. You saw how a timid teacher could be persuaded that obedience in a doubtful matter was a virtue, and how a girl of conscience was almost brought to doubt the evidence of her own senses.
It is a terrible power to wield.
And one that is exercised daily in pulpits, classrooms, and newspaper offices, as well as upon railway platforms. That is why I am sometimes moved to take up a case which has no great outward excitement, because it lays bare some quiet abuse which might otherwise go on unchallenged.
You have at least ensured that in this instance the truth shall not be buried.
For the moment, yes, though human nature has a marvellous knack of throwing dust over inconvenient facts and then complaining that it cannot see its way.
He smiled faintly as he spoke, and relapsed into silence, while I sat watching the play, thought upon his austere features, and pondering upon the strange mixture of hardness and sympathy which made up his character. It is one of the privileges of my later years that I may set down such episodes in their true colours, now that most of the actors have passed from the stage,
and no suffering can be increased by my candour. If I have succeeded in showing in these pages how the keenest of intellects may be allied to a very tender sense of justice, and how even in the smallest of our island stations the shadow of distant wrongs may fall, I shall feel that this record has not been valueless. I am also deeply sensible that you hear my words have given to this old chronicler a gift which he can never repay, the gift of your patience and your attention. I thank you most sincerely for accompanying my friend and myself to the end of this untold case of Sherlock Holmes. If this story has pleased you, I would be greatly obliged if you would mark your approval with a like upon this performance. Should you desire to hear more of our adventures, pray consider subscribing to this channel, that you may be promptly informed when fresh records are placed before you. Your observations and reflections are always of the highest interest to me, so I would warmly invite you to leave a comment sharing any thoughts which this case may have stirred in your mind. If you should feel moved to support our further labours, there is a convenient means of doing so by way of the small square emblem in the corner of your screen, or the link which is set out in the written description of this piece. In that same description, you will also find a path to other works which belong to a quite different series of tales, and which may nevertheless afford you some diversion when you are minded for another turn of the imagination. And now, my dear listener, I must bid you farewell for the present, yet I hope most earnestly that you will join us again when another of the untold cases of Sherlock Holmes is brought to light.